we supposed to not be able to see?
Yeah, really?
Take a look at the run of show. Please take a look at
I can't see.
so that you understand. As I said it, I'm going to be a dick when it comes to your time. It's all there on the left-hand side. You've got 2 minutes for your introduction. I don't want to know, born in Virginia in 2020, quickly. The questions is what we want to get to. You've got 2 minutes on each question. You see the order for the run of show. So you'll know whether you're answering a question first, second, third, fourth, or fifth. That was a blind draw. At the end, there will be 5 questions that were generated from the audience last night or this morning. I will read that question to you, and you will answer it. You'll have 2 minutes. And then your close is 4 minutes. I will give you 30 seconds politely. After politely, I'm going to say thank you very much. Okay? You got it?
Honestly, the lights are...
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our Candidates Forum here at the 10th Annual GotSoccer Winter Convention. On behalf of Gavin Owen Thomas, President and founder of GotSoccer and GotPro, the GotSoccer staff, and all the attendees at this convention, we are pleased to host this forum. My name is Joe Cummings, and I am the moderator for this Candidates Forum. The forum is being streamed on the GotSoccer website at www.gotsoccer.com. The rules of engagement for the forum are as follows. Each candidate will be given 2 minutes to introduce themselves to the attendees. This will not be the time to discuss issues, but merely to give you, the attendees, some information about who they are. The order in which each will speak was determined by a blind draw. I will then ask 6 to 10 questions, giving each of the candidates a chance to reply with their position on the matter. There will be a time limit here also, 2 minutes. The response could be a deep dive, but rather should establish where you stand on certain issues. Last night, I gave a sheet of paper to the attendees, those folks that are here at the convention, and I asked them to list out a question of a certain candidate, a question they would wish to ask of the candidate. And then the last phase will be there will be a closing, and at that point the candidates will have time to talk a little bit more about their position. We have 3 folks that are not here. Carlos Cordero is engaged in a CONCACAF Council meeting. Sunil Gulati is engaged in U.S. soccer business, although not an announced candidate. And Kyle Martino is away on vacation, which was planned prior to his announcing his candidacy. First is the introductions. The order the candidates have in front of them, so they know the order in which they will speak, and they know the order in which they will answer questions. I will give them a 30-second warning when they have 30 seconds left. I will then somewhat delicately, at the end of the 2 minutes, tell them that their time is up. After the delicately part, I'll just say thank you and move on to the next candidate. The order for the introductions, we begin with Paul Lapointe.
Joe, Gavin, thank you for having me here. Awesome event, and I'm honored and humbled to be here. For all you folks in attendance, part of the campaign that I had, a lot of people are asking me, who's this Lapointe guy? You're going to know right now. I've been married 35 years to my wife. I have 2 sons, Michael and Nicholas, 31 and 29. My son Michael also played professional soccer in the Major Indoor Soccer League. And my wife has been very intricately involved in our businesses, both in retail and both in our soccer companies we've owned for many, many years. So if elected, you get 2 for 1, and you get a real soccer mom behind the gates as well. About myself, 47 years ago, I was a ball boy for a college in Rhode Island, fell in love with soccer, went through the youth ranks as a player, went through the high school ranks as a player, went through the professional ranks as a player, became a professional coach, became a youth coach, became a college coach, became a professional league owner in this country. Along with all doing this, I've owned my own company since I've been 26 years old. I'm very familiar with the business landscape outside the lines of soccer, and I definitely know how to maneuver inside the lines of soccer. So your question has been answered, who's this Lapointe guy? I just gave it to you. I'm honored and humbled to be here with you, and I look forward to the questions that are going to come in the next hour or so. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Next up with the introduction, Paul Caligari.
Thank you, GotSoccer, for allowing me to speak to everyone. If you believe that soccer in this country is on the right path and everything is going just fine, then I'm not the right person. I want to identify two areas where soccer is in need. One area is in development, identification, and growth. In 2 minutes' time in the introduction, I can't talk all about that, but I'm here this weekend, and obviously for the viewers, you could reach out and talk. That my specific plan will address all those issues, as well as some really good solutions that will get us on the right track. The other area is inequality. And inequality has been going on far longer than just the pay for play or equal pay. What's going on must stop. And when we heard today Amanda Duffy speaking on behalf of the NWSL, women are more than capable of making decisions for themselves. And in that case, they need a commissioner, and she's capable of being that commissioner. They need to have a voice. And that's what I stand for, and that's what I want to change. In addition to that, for 10 years, when we had the United States Developmental Soccer Academy that was born and ran by United States Soccer Federation, we watched for 10 years that girls would be left out. They weren't inclusive. And I know that everyone here is part of a movement, will speak up on in those areas. But that's what Paul Kellergy is about. And as president of the United States Soccer Federation, I've been there. I've been a board member. I could be the first one on the beach holding that flag down as we build this game to be unstoppable. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Next for the introduction phase, Steve Gans.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you, everyone, for being here. I want to tell you that my brain is here, but my heart is not here today, because my older son, Noah, is a freshman soccer player, and he's about to play his first NCAA tournament game back in Boston. So it's killing me not to be there, truthfully. But there's no other place I could be today, because this is a very important event, and it's too critical a time not to be here in U.S. soccer. Who am I, very quickly and briefly? I'm steeped in this game just like you are. My dad came here from Germany. He passed the passion down to me. I was bitten by that bug that you've all been bitten by. I passed that down to my two sons. When I went away to college, to Cornell to play soccer, I transferred after a year back to Boston to be with the pro soccer team. It was only a part-time job. After college, I deferred law school so I could chase a pro playing, an executive dream, and I did that for 2 years with the Baltimore Blast of the original MISL, 1982 to 1984. When I was 29, I was tasked with turning around the Boston World Cup bid effort for 1994. At that time, not Boston as a city, but the quality of the bid effort was ranked last and 29th out of all cities bidding. And I worked on that full-time for 3 years, and proud to say that Boston was one of 9 sites picked for World Cup 94. Since then, in the 24 years since, I have continuously been in the sport, from youth to pro to the Premier League.
30 seconds, Steve.
And I've done everything in this game other than being a professional referee, representing players and management, as a coach, as a board member of a Development Academy club, as a parent, as a player. This job requires someone with deep soccer background and also deep business experience and organizational leadership experience. I fit that bill. I look forward to talking to you today.
Thank you, Steve. Next, Eric Winalda.
I'll make this quick. I'm a father. I'm a husband. I come from a soccer family, and I consider the rest of you to be a part of that extended family. As a player, I had a very unique experience, playing at every single level possible. Since then, I've been able to integrate into the real world of soccer, both at the youth and the professional levels, which I think gives me a unique skill set as a problem solver and as a soccer man. I do agree with the situation that we are in right now. It requires someone who understands how to fix the soccer problem, and I do believe that problem exists. I do believe that there is a different culture that we need to create within that will make us a soccer nation that we're capable of being. And I think our problem right now is that we've always had great potential. It's time to realize it. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. And the last for the introductions, Mike Winograd.
Well, thanks, Joe, and thanks, GotSoccer, for putting on this event. It's a great event. It's been a pleasure connecting with many of you over the last few weeks, some of you here, some of you that are live streaming. And I want to give you a little bit of background on myself now. And I'm going to start with the soccer and then segue into the business. Played Division I college soccer for 4 years at Lafayette. I played professionally in Israel after that. When I came back, the coach who had coached me my senior year at college, Jeff Gettler, had just taken the job at University of Richmond and asked if I wanted to go coach with him, and of course I did. We coached there, and in addition to the soccer, we hosted the men's Final Four. It was to date, still the largest men's Final Four in NCAA history. I think there were over 40,000 attendees at a college soccer event. After Richmond, I signed a contract with the Rochester Rhinos. The season was due to start in a couple of months, and the coach suggested I go play with the Buffalo Blizzard in MISL. I went, and the first day I blew out my knee. Decided to go to law school. Took the LSATs, but I had to wait until the fall to apply, and then the following fall to actually start law school. My college roommate and great friend, Tom Neal, was working as general manager of the New York Fever in the A-League. He asked if I wanted to help out. Soon after that, the owner asked the two of us to start up a franchise on Staten Island. I handled all of the soccer, from hiring the coach to establishing grassroots programs to drafting policies to picking a name and involving the community in a community-wide vote to finalize that. He handled the business side. About midway through, he left for the San Jose Earthquakes. He became general manager there in the year that they won the MLS Cup.
30 seconds.
I played in the 2005 Maccabea Games, won the silver medal. I've coached. I've stayed on the board in my local organization since 2009. Went to an Ivy League law school, graduated with honors, and ever since have been practicing at the absolute best corporate law firms in the world, representing the largest companies in the world in their highest stakes cases. I also teach for the last 14 years. I've taught law to foreign students at Fordham Law School.
Thank you, Mike. We're going to stay right with Mike as we go to the questions. The candidates were sent the questions a week ago, so we've not surprised them with these questions. They know the order in which they are responding. First question, with Mike, why do you want to be president of U.S. Soccer? Speaking of that, what is your position on the fact that the president does not receive a salary? Each candidate will have 2 minutes.
So, Joe, like many people here, I want to make U.S. soccer better. I think that I'm not the sky is falling, we need to burn it all down kind of person on this. I think we've made great strides over the last 20 years, but we've lagged behind in some places, and the landscape across soccer has become increasingly fractured. We need to catch up in some areas, and we need to fix that fracturing. It's taken years to get us to this point. I was as upset as everybody else when we didn't qualify for the World Cup, but it wasn't just a one-day thing. It's going to take some time to fix. I think I have the soccer experience at all levels, youth to pro, coaching from all perspectives, playing, coaching, managing, and the business side. I sit in boardrooms with CEOs of the largest companies and try and resolve their highest stakes cases. I think I have the ability to do it. With respect to pay, let me just say this. While I'm in term, I'm not going to propose any bill to give myself a salary. That said, for the next president, I fully expect to have that table on the issue. What are the byproducts of the tremendous growth that we've seen in U.S. soccer? It is no longer a mom-and-pop shop. It is a big business. We need to treat it as that. We need to create sophisticated processes, and we need to pay a competitive rate to broaden the pool of qualified candidates stepping up to do this job.
Thank you, Mike. Paul Caligieri.
Well, in terms of a salary for the president, I've been there before. When I first started with the U.S. national team, we didn't receive any money. We had to fight for $15 a day per diem at times, and we've seen the growth. So it's not something I'm not familiar with and wouldn't be able to work with. But more importantly, in terms of why I want to be president of the United States Soccer Federation, I believe it's part of my DNA. And I look back at when I first started playing soccer at 7 years old. I didn't know I loved the game until I started playing. And then at 12 years old, I finally went to watch the LA Aztecs play against the Cosmos, and I was a ball boy on the sideline. I said, you know what, I want to be on that field, and I want to show the world that America can play. I think we've done that. At 15 years old, I went and played in Hertha Berlin and lived there in Germany and went through a 6.5-month process of understanding. That's 37 years ago. I was playing Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, games on Friday. It's still missing in this country. As the DNA continues, I became a men's and women's head college coach after my long career. And I understand what it's like at those levels. I've built youth clubs. I've been a director of academy clubs. I've interimed at LA Galaxy Academy. I've built fields. I've done endowments. I've been very much part of the game in all aspects, and I believe that that is part of my DNA, my experience that I want to bring to soccer in the United States, for us to continue building soccer in America and making us the best in the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Eric?
Well, first I would say that the decision to want this job, maybe it comes out of need. And I would go first to leadership. I've been a part of our national team programs, and we're unfortunately looking at that in a different lens right now because we did fail to qualify. But if we go back 10, 20 years, not a whole lot has changed. And that might throw some of you off because we are all sitting here celebrating the growth of the game. We all know, especially everyone in this room, knows how fragmented it is. We know that we're fighting with each other, not just at the youth level, but also at the pro level. And again, this is the cultural issue that I would go back to. We all scream about change. We all want it to be better. Change for the sake of change. We will be sitting in this room 4 years from now if we don't engage in appropriate change. What that means to me is I've sat back for 20 years and waited and hoped that we were doing this appropriately, that this industry, this machine that we've become with all this potential, that we would figure it out. Well, we haven't. And it does stem from leadership on all the levels that we're going to address today. Now, as far as the paid part of this, he's a lawyer, so is my wife.
30 seconds.
That might make a difference in our life, but I do believe that there are two parts to that. That some people believe that it should be a paid position to hold the president accountable. And the reasons why it has been an unpaid position for so long is to deter this process. But we're here, all of us, because we care about the game and we want change.
Thank you, Eric. Next, Steve Gans.
So people have been after me to run for this office for a couple of years, and I graciously declined. I thought it was a really big undertaking. What I've learned is it's a really, really big undertaking. And in the last 4 weeks, I've learned even more so. It's been unbelievable. I graciously declined, and then after Jurgen Klinsmann was fired last year, I revisited it. I thought of it because people came back to me with a vengeance. And I thought about it for a good 7 months, and as many of you know, this past May, I announced that I was likely going to run in a story in the Washington Post. And then I went on a listening tour. So the types of things that I've been talking about for 6 months are the type of things we're faced with. What happened with respect to 4 weeks ago and the disaster in Trinidad and Tobago, that wasn't a moment frozen in time. Rather, it was a symptom, it was a representation of the issues that we've been concerned about and talking about for some time now. Why did I decide to run? 2 principles. One was a simple democratic one, and that is that this would have been the 4th term in a row that was an uncontested election. 16 years, same president uncontested. That's just not right in America. Somebody had to do this, and I'm proud to say I was the first one to do it. Secondly, I think we can do better. Thought we could do better 6 months ago, thought we could do better 3 months ago when I announced formally, and we can have better leadership and we can have better judgment in this position. With respect to whether it should be a paid position, that's a really tricky question.
30 seconds.
That's a very tricky question for this reason. It is a president position, which is technically an officer, but it seems to function like chairman of the board of directors. In Massachusetts, my state, the Attorney General says that directors of nonprofits ought not to be paid. This has to be distinguished as to whether it truly is an officer position and you're in Chicago full-time like Dan Flynn is, who, by the way, should be paid. He's a full-time officer. Or really, even though it's called president, it's really like board of directors.
Thank you, Steve. Paul LaPointe.
Ladies and gentlemen, I chose to run for this presidency because I made a promise to the American grassroots soccer community. And the very reason why you're here today is because of youth soccer. And that is where the investment of the USSF and American soccer should be right now, in their attention span thereof. Whether the position's paid or not, it doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is that the president becomes a full-time position so he or she could fully engage in the everyday process to deal with the sectors of this sport that lack the attention it really, really needs. We can talk about not qualifying for a World Cup. We can talk about pay to play. We can talk about all these things. None of these things, including the federation itself, exist without our youth soccer players and our amateur soccer players. It's time to give back to those sectors first. Everything else gets fixed along the way. I'll say it again, we're not going to fix all the issues by changing the Major League Soccer schedule or by handpicking a national team coach or talking about what Klinsman or Bruce Arena did. We're going to fix it by investing in youth soccer, inner city, YMCA, Boys and Girls Clubs, region states, and it's time to give power back to those regions and states to do the great work that needs to get done to support the very federation we belong to.
Thank you, Paul. I will take a moment and urge the candidates, and the closing, they will have twice the amount of time to make their remarks. So if there are points that they wish to revisit in your closing, you will have ample time to do that. Question number 2. What are your thoughts on pay to play? First up, Paul Caligari.
Well, pay to play, that's a broad topic, obviously, but I think everyone that's involved in soccer, particularly at the youth level, could agree that there is a pay to play system. It's just what is broken and what we do to assist that method. Most every sport has coaches that you pay for, be it basketball, gymnastics, even football, baseball, etc. When you have club style, that's a pay-to-play system. But I think when we really look at what's broken there and what's happening, and the ones that have truly been there, and I've coached at those levels. My 2 daughters have played soccer. I've coached in the recreational level, into the club level, etc., even into the adult level. It's real, and there's a cost factor. And what's real to me and what's bothering to me is the fact that pay for play it excludes many players, perhaps millions across the country. I come from Southern California. In my estimate, just in Southern California, is over 500,000 kids are not part of U.S. soccer because it is a pay-for-play system. We have to look for ways to assist with that. And in my opening, I mentioned that I practiced 4 times a year, 37 years ago when I was 15 years old. We're challenged with that. Most places you practice either Tuesday, Thursday, Monday, Wednesday. In my plan, I will utilize the funds to help with Friday soccer, where it'll be a supervised program
30 seconds.
where families feel safe with dropping their kid off to do more of a pickup type soccer at local communities, in the communities, such as middle schools, where we'll build facility enhancement programs. Those are the initiatives I think will help with the pay-for-play system, as well as what we see the good work of many clubs throughout the country, state associations, U.S. Club Soccer, and everyone else that's doing the philanthropy work that's necessary to help with this issue.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Eric Winalda.
Well, I think it is, of course, as Paul very astutely stated, I do think this is something that will be an ongoing conversation, because sometimes it's a very misunderstood concept. What exactly is pay-to-play? I mean, I'm making a broad statement like that. If you look at club soccer, and I'm right in the middle of it, I've got two kids that I have an 8-year-old that I get the bill. Bills for about $3,300 a year. Of course, that's too much. But the bigger issue here is we're talking about an 8-year-old. We're talking about an 8-year-old little boy who is paying for coaching and paying for the facilities and paying to play this game. Now, these things need to get paid for. We all understand the industry that we are in. My daughter, it's a little worse. She's a little older, and that's how this works right now. The United States Soccer Federation comes in, flashes the badge, and says, "You guys ready to spend some real money?" There's a couple of other teams that you might want to be a part of. And we pull the heartstrings of our parents, and we convince them that this is the only way for them to convince them that they need to pay for this in order to get a scholarship. And at the end of the day, they end up paying more money just to play this game that the scholarship is actually going to would have costed. I believe that there are mechanisms within that we can start having a policy towards this, especially from the United States Soccer Federation standpoint, that this becomes a much more manageable industry. I think pay-to-play might really be, when some of you parents have experienced this, you have to buy 3 rain jackets. You're never going to wear that rain jacket because they did a deal with your whatever team that they're sponsored by. These are things that happen within our system. I'm with Paul completely.
Thank you, Eric.
Okay.
Mike, Winograd.
So with respect to pay-to-play, we need to get kids in front of good coaches early. And cost barriers are an impediment to that. And I look at pay-to-play in 2 respects. Not just getting kids in front onto teams, right? It's ridiculous to pay. You have to pay $1,000 just for your local travel team. You have to pay, as Eric was saying, $3,000 plus travel, plus hotels if you're playing outside of your local club team. But I also look at it on the coaching side. Somebody graduates college after playing 4 years of college soccer. She decides to go off on a different, in a different career path, but wants to contribute, wants to stay involved in soccer. And she now has to spend $1,000+ on a coaching course to refine and hone her skills as a teacher and a coach, and tell her, by the way, you're going to have to travel there and pay for a hotel. It's too much, and it's an impediment. These things should be based on desire and merit, not finances. So how are we going to do it? It's easy to say we need money in the system. Well, I've got 5 points that I've talked about quite a bit. We've got a surplus in U.S. soccer that we can dip into. We need a team that's going to make sure we're not leaving money on the table in terms of public grants. We need to grow and invest in U.S. Soccer Foundation and an organization I've supported for several years, and organizations like it who already have that structure in place, not just to go to big companies to build stadiums and fields in inner cities, but also they now are reaching out to municipalities to get infrastructure, money that's earmarked for infrastructure for fields. We also need to go into the private sector. My firm, Ropes & Gray, represents the biggest private equity firms in the world. Bain Capital, TPG. Bain has $75 billion under management. We need to see where there's money there. Last I'll talk about is solidarity payments. Not just the money that you get if you actually do it right and you get a payment, but solidarity payments will incentivize people to go and invest money up front at the team level, and will incentivize them to go to the local markets, local businesses, local people. That's a market that none of us can touch. The clubs have to do it, and they need the incentive to do it.
Thank you, Mike. Paul Lapointe.
Let's define pay-to-play first. Not one of us up on this stage is going to have the capabilities of going into independent clubs and organizations in this country that have been in business for 30 years and tell them that their customers are not going to be able to pay anymore. It's illegal. What we can do, though, is create a solution through an identification program and a player registration program that incentivize these clubs that are already doing great work and let them feel like the Federation is not stepping on their toes, and let them be free, but add to these programs and add to their program. I'm the only candidate up here that talks about inner city, futsal. Where does that stand in our development process? I also believe, as Steve does, I don't think a coach should have to remortgage his or her house to get a B license in this country. I also agree about the surplus. Can we take some of that and apply that to solidarity payments as well for clubs who are doing the great work? But pay to play is a very sensitive issue, but we need to define a system through registration and identification and stop the poaching of players in this country as well. As a former club owner, the worst feeling I had in the world was developing a player for 5 years or 6 years and have another club come in and sell them the Kool-Aid for the day, and I lose that player, and maybe all I have at the end of the day is bragging rights that they went to a DA or an ODP academy or possibly went to another elite club. It's a bad feeling. Wouldn't it be nice if some of these clubs now received a payment for developing those players in this country? And I'll go to it again. Youth system, amateur soccer, we concentrate there. All the other problems are fixed, including the money of soccer as well.
Thank you, Paul. Steve Gans.
It's actually fun going last because I don't have to worry about Joe cutting me off because all the answers have been made. So I'm going to say in 5 seconds I agree with everyone that unfortunately, we're not going to eliminate pay-to-play in this country. The question is how to address it. How to address it. So I'd say a couple of things. Think of this inverse relationship. U.S. soccer has more of a surplus than it's ever had, $130 to $140 million. And yet it just had the most catastrophic result that it's ever had. What's wrong with this picture? So you have to better believe that that surplus, and I know it's going to be a later question, but I have to say it addresses it here too. It's going to be used to defray pay-to-play. It's the ethical thing to do for kids who otherwise cannot play from inner cities or rural areas. Mr. Guthrie talked to me about that in Indiana, who aren't able to afford it, or otherwise suburban kids that just can't afford it. It's the ethical thing to do, and it's the proper thing to do because there are so many kids. If that's a true number, it's shocking, 500,000 kids that aren't playing. So that's number one. We're going to address it partially that way. Number two, I would say is, the clubs need to be reined in a little bit because, and I come from a club I love, but I have to say all clubs, they sell the dream to the parents, okay? And this needs to change a little bit. There have to be good housekeeping standards that make sure there's fair and honest communication with parents and kids about where the kids really are. I know of one club that says, we never cut anybody. Well, interpret that another way. They'll add a 6th and 7th or 8th team because they can get the revenue. So there are two ways of looking at that. The last thing I would say is this.
30 seconds.
The solidarity payment issue is a very difficult issue. I'm very sympathetic to the crossfire in those 20 clubs because I come from a development academy club, non-MLS as well. My belief is MLS would like to settle this. I think the solidarity payment issue should be solved, can be solved. I think the parties should get into a room and come up with a presumptive answer and then test the legality together.
Thank you, Steve. The next question, what is your position on promotion relegation? Paul Lapointe, you will go first.
This is a subject that has been on topic for months now. And we use this term promotion and relegation like it's been in our culture and in our American soccer society for a long time, and it has not. But I'm going to be very direct, and this is how direct I am on promotion and relegation. I'm the Northeast Conference manager for the United Premier Soccer League, and this league has over 100 teams in it right now. And the commissioner and I, we always talk about promotion and relegation within the UPSL. And it's a fresh start for American soccer. I totally believe it. But this is my take on it, and I'm very candid about it. Major League Soccer, at this point, we're not going to go in those castle walls and interrupt that sandbox with promotion and relegation because there's a lot of business that's associated and tagged to this process. But what we can do is apply it with a test pilot in NPSL, PDL, UPSL, state organization teams that already have similar business models, fairly operate in the same budget constraints, and 80% of what I talk about in those ranks want promotion and relegation anyway. But we need to institute it in those ranks first. Work out the kinks, define the process, but nobody's come forth and defined that process yet. I will, and we're going to institute it in those ranks first. If Major League Soccer does not want to participate in the future of American soccer in that forum, then if they want to fly in their own flight pattern, in their own airspace, then let them have it.
Thank you, Paul.
We'll build our own sandbox on the side if we have to, but promotion and relegation's coming.
Paul Caligari.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. LaPointe. I actually coach in the UPSL, and it's quite exciting to be on the coaching side of a league that does have some format of promotion and relegation. That segues into my playing career, where I did play in the German Bundesliga, both the first and second, and I understand what it's like being on the verge of being promoted, which I was with a team that we did promote into the Bundesliga. And I also joined a team that was promoted from the third division to the second division, and a team that was from second to first division, and understand what those what we're shooting for all year, and the excitement it brings fans, and what it does for players in terms of healthy competition. And what I mean by that is each and every practice and every game, you can't become complacent. So in terms of looking at the United States, we have to look and build this culture. It's exciting now to see that soccer is so far along that we have fans that enjoy this beautiful game. And we're bringing this to the attention, but we could start it from the grassroots level. When I look at the grassroots level, I believe that futsal should be from 6 to 12 years old, but starting at the youth levels in these youth leagues, we could start doing promotion relegation. We have a league in Southern California that does it, and it's worked wonderfully for years. In terms of adult soccer, yes, absolutely. We could start helping the adult USA with mandating leagues of certain quality and standards to do promotion relegation. I think that's what players want to play in the adult league. I think it's exciting. I think from the youth level, it starts building a culture that we all want in the United States to see, to continue our growth that would promote registration at all levels. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Paul. Mike?
So I'm going to assume your question relates to pro-rel in the professional ranks and not the youth. And that's something we can talk a little bit later about, going state by state to restructure the fragmentation that's going on in the states. But at the pro level, there are very few things that would be as exciting in U.S. soccer as promotion and relegation. As a practical matter, it's just not there yet. You've got MLS with $150+ million franchise rights. You've got contractual relationships and agreements between the owners and the league. It's just not a practical reality right now. What we need to do to make it a reality is immediately start focusing on building the strength, the stability, and the profitability of the lower leagues. Close the gap between the lower leagues and MLS to bring that possibility into the nearer term. In the meantime, we should explore alternative possibilities. And this is part of getting people in a room and figuring out if we can articulate persuasively a path forward that may actually be obtainable in the near future. Something I've talked a lot about is, well, what if as an interim measure, not today, not tomorrow, but maybe in the nearer term at least, we had guest relegation promotion. We tell MLS, for example, your teams aren't eligible for relegation, but we'll create a certain number of spots for promotion from the lower leagues. If those teams finish within the bottom 4, that team gets relegated and the spot opens up for a new promotion. If it doesn't, then if the team finishes above the top 4, it stays there and there's no promotion that year. It's simple.
30 seconds. But
it's a matter of figuring out how best to approach the league so it makes sense in everybody's interest. And one of the things to remember is, first you have to decide what power U.S. soccer actually does and doesn't have. And then you need to decide whether it should exercise it. Because I don't think U.S. soccer should be in the business of ramming things down people's throats.
Thank you, Mike. Eric.
Well, I, like Paul, have a very unique understanding of promotion and relegation. Having suffered a relegation at one point in my career, I understand that doomsday feeling. However, I disagree. I think that this country is ready. And I think there are reasons why it is ready. And one of the reasons mainly is because we don't really understand how exactly a flourishing league operates. And that usually comes from the television revenues. One of the things that if we take the EPL as a model, or we take the La Liga, and we have this assumption that a Major League Soccer team, if in the event that they were relegated, that they would lose money. They're losing money anyway. You need to remember that. There are mechanisms that you can employ within a promotion and relegation structure. And they're actually called parachutes, which are employed in the other leagues. What this means is if you get relegated, it is basically you're being held accountable for your bad business. It doesn't mean that you lose money, but it does allow you to assess your club. In this case, we're talking about franchises, not clubs. And you can become stronger in the end. Think about this. And teams in Germany have gone down and up and down and up, and they've actually made more money because of the mechanisms that exist to allow these clubs to reallocate their assets and do the business of soccer appropriately. Talk to Columbus right now. Wonder how they feel. We don't believe in promotion and relegation. We just pulled the rug out from under them and decided that we're going to move your team, very similar to the NFL.
30 seconds.
Baltimore, Indianapolis many years ago. Tell that to the fans. It's getting relegated on competitive merit is one thing, but just losing your team and your club because it doesn't make sense anymore is another. This is a major part of our growth as a soccer nation.
Thank you, Eric. Steve Gans.
Well, this is one I'm really glad I went last on again. So it's a very complex issue. And, you know, what I would say is that everybody steeped in this game loves promotion relegation. I've said before in articles, everybody watches the last week of the Premier League season or whatever league you watch, and you watch that last day when the games are being played simultaneously. And you don't look to see who's going to win the championship or who's in first. You look to see who's going to stay up and who's going to go down. It's an exciting thing. It makes the game inherently great. It's another wonderful aspect of it. And ideally, we would have that here now. I will also say that the very passionate promotion relegation people have really made a good point that's not been lost on me in the last 4 weeks since the U.S. got knocked out. And that is a player who plays week in and week out, knowing he's playing for survival or she's playing for survival, they develop more of a cutting edge. That's a logical theorem. It really is true. That said, you cannot divorce yourself from the economic reality of sports in this country. And I've heard people on the promotion relegation side say they don't care if an MLS owner who's invested 150 or 200 or 250 million in this league, they pull out because of promotion relegation. And a lot of you in this audience, you go back in time with me, and you know, and you can remember 1985 to 1996, when we did not have a major Division I league in this country, and it was a wasteland for outdoor soccer players. My league, Major Indoor Soccer League, was doing fine, but it was a wasteland for outdoor soccer players and for fans, and I don't ever want to go back to that. So I believe in promotion relegation, definitely in principle. I believe in it in terms of other leagues that may want to do it, but to impose this on MLS at this moment in time, I think you have to consider it within the economic structure. It's a complex issue that continues to need study.
Thank you, Steve. The next question. What do you think of the present nomination process for the position of U.S. Soccer President? And please explain the election process. First up, Steve Gans.
Okay, I can handle that first. So I'll say a little bit about the current process because it's an individual experience for me. As said, I was the first candidate 6 months ago to presumptively announce. July 11th, I formally requested the list of voting delegates from U.S. Soccer, a nonprofit organization, a nonprofit corporation of the state of New York, a 501c3 charity. There are principles of nonprofit law that information should be freely shared of that kind of type, and I didn't get that list. And I went to Dallas and met a lot of you in late July, and one of the things you talked to me about is fairness and transparency. That's part of my platform. And I got back from Dallas, and 4 days later I got a letter telling me that the Nominating Governance Committee was now meeting to develop new eligibility rules. So without saying more, I'm kind of troubled by how that developed midstream in this process. In terms of how the election process works, my understanding is that it flows from the number of youth registered players, and then from there, The voting percentages are set. The Athletes Council has 20% vote at all times, pursuant to the Olympic Committee Act. And in the most recent election, the Youth, Adult Council, and Pro had 25.8% of the vote. And then other associations had vote as well. That's the basic structure of it. While that's true, there are weighted votes within that. Youth is 1-for-1. Pro is weighted, I think last time I looked, 28.6 to 1. That's a little bit about the background.
Thank you, Steve. Mike Winograd.
So I won't sort of retread some of the ground Steve just covered. There's a lack of clarity in the nomination process. And I think, frankly, there's a lack of sophistication. The processes that have gone on are not befitting an organization this size with this much at stake. And somebody needs to go in and fix the processes and make them better and make them more transparent. It's something that we do at our law firm all the time for big companies. It's important and it's critical for running the company properly. A nomination process should encourage the democratic process. It shouldn't discourage people. It shouldn't keep people out. There is a tremendous lack of clarity as to when the nomination process starts, as to what people with the nomination can and cannot do with it, and that needs to be fixed. With respect to the election process, I do understand it. I had to read the bylaws. I had an associate at my law firm help. It is not a very clear and simple thing. And as Steve said, there are effectively 4 groups. You've got the Youth, Adult, Pro, and Athletes Councils, which effectively have a balanced vote. But there are troubles within that, too. It is much easier. There are weights within each of those councils, and it's much easier for a block if you're talking about fewer delegates. So if an Athletes Council has far fewer delegates, it's easier for them to vote as a block, and effectively forcing the youth and adult councils to form a block across 50-plus constituents. I think we need more clarity. I think somebody needs to make these processes more transparent and more open and, quite frankly, more fair.
Thank you, Mike. Paul Caligari.
The presidential nomination process, we first have to look at when it came and why it came. And I'll leave it to everyone else to decide. When United States men's national team is on the fringe of not qualifying in the all-importance game against Panama, it was just before that. Ultimately, we have a great game against them, and we don't in Trinidad. And we're all saddened by that. When we hear that it's not democratic at all, it's specifically against the Roberts Rule of Order. And that alone, having a single nomination imposed, brings to question. It's not fair. It's not right. It wasn't explained. It was rushed. Those are all facts. But regardless, we move on. In terms of how the voting process works, I was on the board of directors. I was an actual Athletes Council. And then I was a board of directors. I understand completely how it works with the 4 councils, the pros, the athletes, the adults, and the youth, and the board, and then some at-large positions. The beautiful thing about United States Soccer Federation is we just don't look up to FIFA. We actually look up to and answer to the United States Olympic Committee. And the reason why we have athletes on the board
30 seconds.
Is because the Stevens Act. It's very important that we serve all players in this country and do not deny any player for any reason or penalize them. And those rules are stipulated very clearly on the United States Olympic Committee. That's why we have athletes on our national governing body. No other country in the entire world does this. 212 countries in the world of FIFA, we're the only country that has that privilege with those rules and bylaws, and it's very important we
Thank you, Paul.
adhere to them. Thank you.
Eric.
All right, so how many of you feel like you're walking around with a number on your head right now? Is that the way this works? Look, it is a complicated process, and understanding and reading the bylaws was something that I think all of us engaged in simply because we needed to have a better understanding of what the challenges that we had in front of us. Now, involving the adult council or the youth and the pro council, what we've learned over the years, and of course the athletes council, we've learned over the years is that there was an attempt to give everybody a voice. But the reality is that this has been built by one man, our current president, Mr. Galati, who's built a cocoon for himself that it seems like he's in a maze that he walks around and he's the only one that sees the invisible breadcrumbs. It's a very difficult and complicated process, but to both of Mike and Steve's point, I do believe it needs to be revisited. It needs to have a much different approach to it. And I do believe that some of the conflicts of interest that exist within the structure right now are making this election very problematic. But in the end, I do believe that once we get through this process, and as we've mentioned, it would have been 16 years with one president, that's going to change. And when that does, I'm sure that the bylaws will follow suit, and things will get less complicated, if you will, and we'll stop looking at you like numbers.
Thank you, Eric. Paul, a point.
The USSF election process is very ambiguous, and it's not clear. And in my mind, as a blue-collar man, this system is as closed as the soccer system we're all here talking about. If I'm elected president of the USSF, we're going to peel back those layers one at a time. And thank God I have two attorneys, one to my left and one to my right, that can guide us through that process. But we all just gave an opinion on what the election process is, and I don't think any one of us are really clear. As of 2 days ago, I was told that you could rescind on a decision on a candidate that you might have already put a nomination in for, and then come here and maybe change your mind. In September, they were working on a nomination and governance committee then. So in my mind, I'd like to also talk about the time frame. I registered into the Federation in my letter of intent in early September. That gives me from early September to December 10th, I believe, to come up with the proper nominations and then run a campaign at the same time. I find that very odd. It's very short. It's a huge task.
30 seconds.
So we're going to change the election process, but it's going to take a president that has the guts to go in there and peel back those layers one at a time and once again define that process in layman's terms so everybody in the American soccer community can understand it and also participate in it as well.
Thank you, Paul. The next question. The latest reports indicate that U.S. soccer has a surplus of $100 million and perhaps closer to $150 million. In your opinion, should any of this money go back to the membership? And if so, how would you distribute it? If not, what is the purpose of that much surplus cash in control of U.S. soccer? First to answer, Eric Winalda.
Yeah, give me the money question. All right, so one of the things that we've recognized over the years is that the business of soccer, if we're pulling in $10 to $15 million a year, and that trend has been enjoyed over the last 5 to 6 years, what we need to understand is where's the money coming from? And a lot of people aren't really clear on that. And coming from the television aspect, what you need to understand is about 49% of that $94 million is coming from television. That's where that revenue is being brought in. Now, the second part is going to be mainly from events, from the United States national team. Now, we're both on the men and women's side. Now, the problem with that is it's going to be an odd year. And it's a time, actually, what many would think, to be a little less conservative because it's time to reinvest in us. However, this explains this, what we'll call it a registration war that we are experiencing right now. The reason why the money is, or their attempt to collect revenue has been altered at this time is because they want to change it from the referees, as far as the national or the federation is concerned. They want control of the referees and the coaching, and of course the state associations. What that means is they're reallocating how they're going to get the money, because they've recognized that the failure at the top, as far as the soccer went, is going to be a big hit to our federation. It's a problem. Now, the money isn't going to essentially go away from the television side of things. We have a long-term deal, and that will give us the stability that we need. However, right now, as far as this money is concerned, in my opinion, and to a couple of the guys' points, it needs to be appropriately allocated back to the game. Simply put, it doesn't matter how much money we have, if we don't know how to spend it, what are we doing?
Thank you, Eric. Paul Lapointe.
This surplus is not the Federation's money. It's your money sitting right in these seats tonight. That surplus is supporting all the things that we're talking about, incentivizing solidarity payments, inner city, futsal, building of fields in this country, in the inner cities. We talked about coaching education, pay to play. This money is sitting there in deep space right now, and nobody knows what to do with it. I do. We're going to give it back to the states and regions through coaching and education, supporting inner city, the development process of our kids from 3 years old to 19 that need a pathway to our national team process. Because at the end of the day, we talk about losing our qualification level at the World Cup level. I think we know why we lost that qualification. It's because we don't have a defined player identification system and a recruiting system thereof from the Federation to come out and allocate those funds to professional people to go out and find those players. And I'll say it again, we fixed the youth system that technically is not broken. It needs new software. It needs a reboot. Part of this money is part of that process. But I think it deserves to go back to the very people who gave it to the Federation to begin with. Whether it came from TV, whether it came from the national team revenue, whether it came from camps and clinics, or however you want to slice it and dice it. We got to give it back to the American soccer community, or everything that we're talking about won't come to pass anyway.
Thank you, Paul. Steve Gans.
I agree with my colleagues on this, that yes, the money goes back. Again, let's talk about that inverse relationship. $130 to $140 million surplus, worst result. What value is it to be held by the Federation and hoarding that money? It needs to go back. And yeah, I agree, it needs to go back to you guys. It needs to go back to the adult and youth state associations for your programs to help with your particular programs. It needs to go for field development, whether it's a futsal court in Indiana or whether it's an inner city outdoor court field, artificial turf of the type they're using in South London now and where Premier League teams are now scouting, or whether it's rehab of other fields in Southern California. Whatever it is, those monies go back. They go back for fields. They go back to address pay to play because, again, ethically and pragmatically, bring kids in the system who can't otherwise play. They go back to address issues with respect to the women, youth players, lack of equal opportunity, coaches, youth coaches and DOCs, not enough opportunities for women. And by the way, we had a great presentation earlier about the NWSL. I actually happen to represent the Boston Breakers of the NWSL, and I know how hard those owners work to make that team work. They have a difficult field situation themselves, and I think U.S. Soccer can support that more, and they should support that more, even though obviously they are subsidizing it. And so we go back to coaches development, coach the coaches. It goes back to build this program.
Thank you, Steve. Mike.
So $150 million is a lot, and I think it needs to go to two places. One, pay to play, and as I said earlier, that's not just the kids, but it's the coaches. Get kids in front of good coaches as early as possible. The other place it needs to go to is, and we'll talk about the other 99%, but that the 1% of kids who are on the path to the national team, we need to clearly define a path to the national team. And one of the ways we're going to do it is we're going to build state soccer centers in each state. Big states may have more than one, just like we have more than one association. And the money's going to go to that. We're going to build a building, something modest, with 2 fields, and it's going to house a state soccer director. And he or she is going to be responsible for identifying and training players in that state. I'll talk a little bit more about reorganizing states and how I absolutely think it needs to be on a state-by-state basis. There's no one-size-fits-all solution in this country. But for the elite path to the national team, we need to clearly define it, and that's going to be the role in each state of the state soccer director. And that director is going to get paid a competitive salary. We want people to consider it who are qualified as a potential career path. The state director is going to identify by going across all leagues, not just 1 or 2 leagues, and the training is going to be coordinated with the other leagues in the state.
30 seconds.
We're going to have blackout dates, and we're going to get kids who have aspirations and abilities to get to the national team training at that U.S. Soccer State Center 8, 10, 12 times a year during those blackout dates.
Thank you, Mike. Paul Caligari.
Well, first, what I'm going to do as president is give back the fees that you're paying for youth soccer directly into a program and adult soccer. So the $2 that you pay right now will stay in adult soccer, and the dollar that youth plays will stay with those organizations to build it. That's to start off. In terms of the reinvesting and allocating these monies, we talk about platforms, whatever it may be. It's incredibly important that everyone clearly understands it must fall under the Olympic Developmental Program. We could build a United States Olympic Developmental Program academy structure where now we could reach to all our resources rather than only reaching to some of them. For instance, with United Soccer coaches, overnight, I will allow every high school coach to be an Olympic Developmental Program scout. We need those eyes. We need that information. We talk about memberships. How many high school players do not participate in your states? A ton. We could do something overnight magical. We could utilize our college coaches to be our Olympic Developmental Program Academy coaches. We could be inclusive, and we will be. We will pay for, one of my goals will be to get 10,000 new coaching credentials. We speak of coaches, 10,000 new ones.
30 seconds.
Which country could say that? Yeah. And we could do it very easily because we could utilize our pro leagues, the WPSL, the Women's Professional League, and the Adult Professional Leagues we spoke about. And we could do a professional coaches course two weekends before and 2 weekends after the season. Much like Germany did when they wanted to win the World Cup, they looked to their coaching and they built it that way. So these programs will be successful with successful coaching.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Next question. If elected president, what is your plan for the organizational structure of U.S. Soccer? And first up, Steve Gans.
Thanks, Joe. So, I believe you talk about U.S. Soccer, you're talking about the organization in Chicago and how it operates. And what I would say is this. It's been suggested, for instance, that the organization's grown so big that maybe the full-time officers, the CEO, that role should be split. It's been suggested by one candidate that maybe there should be a general manager of soccer, which is an interesting idea on paper, so you split these positions. That could be something that's explored. I think what I'd say is, what I know is that there's going to be a top-to-bottom review of the soccer house in Chicago. This has been a grueling 6-month process, exhausting, honestly exhausting. But what has been gratifying is meeting so many of you guys in Dallas and the adult people in Lake Tahoe. And one of the things I keep hearing that you don't get from U.S. Soccer is respect. And what I've said is that everybody in Chicago is going to respect you and every other constituent. They may not always give you the answer that you want, but they're going to deal with you respectfully. That's going to change. And I've run companies, and I'm a really good boss and a real loyal employer. And I give the employee the benefit of the doubt. But in this kind of case, if I keep hearing these stories where you aren't respected, the rebuttable presumption is going to be against the employee and the benefit of the doubt the other way. So we're going to look at all of that, and we're going to hold a summit within the first 60 days of taking office that involves you and every other constituent in blocks to sort of address this issue.
Thank you, Steve. Eric Winalda.
Many years ago, some of you might be familiar with the name Hank Steinbrecher, who's a very dear friend of mine, was smart enough to recognize another impasse where the United States Soccer Federation seemed to be dysfunctioning. It seemed to be on the brink of something great, but there was too many people that were arguing about all the same things, and not a lot was getting done. Huge favor of the summit because it's so important. What we've realized through this process is that at the administrative side, there's going to be components of it as far as the administrative or the competitive part of it, and then the financial side. The finances are going to be people that understand that. The competitive side needs to be reevaluated. I am so encouraged, though, I must say, speaking to people who have been a part of the 157 scouts that now exist within U.S. Soccer, they are doing this right, maybe for the first time. This is why we're seeing growth at the 17s and the U20 level. Let's give Jurgen Klinsmann some credit here. Some of the things that he did put into action are starting to show themselves now. Maybe we didn't get to see it quickly enough, but as far as on the competitive side, I think we're starting to be on the right track to figure that part out. However, we have a huge problem in the youth. Huge. We all know it. It's the elephant in the room. We have people and organizations working against each other and trying to figure out what is our purpose here. And what ends up happening is that we have an unstructured system, and we have this academy thing over here that no one knows what is happening.
30 seconds.
So I believe that with a man like Dan Flynn, who's been there a long time, a guy like Jay Berhalter and Sunil Gulati, I'm very much in favor of having some paid positions of people that we can delegate some of these energies to allow us to be more efficient.
Thank you, Eric. Paul Caligari.
When we speak of culture, I spoke of culture earlier and utilized futsal in the young ages and pickup soccer to try to generate a safe place for kids to play. But culture has to go from the top to bottom as well. Creating an environment is important that people enjoy working and enjoy doing things. So that's, for me, what represents this beautiful game is what we do for others, not just the great goal we see. And with that said, I believe we need to have a new set of values, values that truly represent the United States and will make America proud of what we're all doing for so long that we want to continue doing. Clearly, I know what I would do. Number one, I would fund the Athletes' Council. So those athletes we talk about that have 20% of votes, you may have met already or spoken to them. And over a 4-year period, they would understand what your concerns are, what the adult concerns are, what the youth concerns are, and be integrated to this. So number one, it's the only council not funded is the Athletes' Council. So they could have, and I would raise their standards. Raise their standards. If you sit on the Athletes' Council and you sit on the United States Soccer Board of Directors for soccer, you must do certain things. Be present, be involved, be engaged. And I know lots of athletes that would love to hold that position and do it righteously. Secondly, I would hire a technical director. In some countries, they call it sporting director. And that technical director and sporting director would assist with many decisions that go on. Ultimately, I understand that the President of the United States would have to make those tough decisions, and I'm prepared to do so. But at least we could have meaningful and engaging conversations that make sense. Thirdly, I would look internally what the CEO is, what the CEO currently does, and I'd look externally. And I'd look to places like Silicon Valley that make sense. We will grow soccer in this country, both on and off the field, but we must do it together.
Thank you, Paul.
And I'd be honored to be your leader. Mike.
So I talked a little bit a while ago about player development and what we're going to do there with the State Soccer Center and State Director. And I want to talk now about the other 99% of the people playing soccer in this country for all the right reasons: teamwork, playing with classmates, health, competitiveness. We have serious fracturing in youth soccer. U.S. soccer has basically become a big conglomerate of overlapping, competing, and unclear structures. As a parent, when I got involved coaching my kids, I remember after I coached them in rec and then I coached them in travel, I couldn't even figure out what team was for what. There's absolutely no clarity. A consumer in the market, whether it's a player, parent, or coach, doesn't even know anymore what product is for what. They hear, well, you know, my kid may not be on target for the national team, but I want her to explore the sport. She loves it. She seems pretty good at it. Well, they're telling me this league is better than that league, but this team's beating that team, and they need different passes depending on where we go. We need to solve all that. And the way we're going to solve it is on a state-by-state basis. There is no one-size-fits-all solution. You can't sit in Chicago and dictate from an ivory tower. What's going to work in New Hampshire is not the same that's going to work in Arizona. It's not the same that's going to work in Florida or New York or California. This country is too big. It's too diverse geographically, demographically, in terms of topography. We need to go state by state. And the way we're going to do that is we already have representatives in each state. There's state soccer associations. Now, that means they need to involve the state soccer director, and they need to involve the other leagues who have an interest in what's going on. And there needs to be a discussion about the most effective structure going forward.
30 seconds.
And that structure needs to have clarity for the consumer. Once we have those structures in place, U.S. Soccer then needs to step in and make sure that there are minimum standards and minimum rules that apply evenly and uniformly throughout. But ultimately, it has to be on a state-by-state basis.
Thank you, Mike. Paul LaPointe.
There's two sectors of structure and organization that we talk about. I'll address the first one, and that's the federation itself. If I'm elected president, we're going to peel back the layers of the very organization itself. Will it take an outside firm to do it? I think so. Would it take an outside financial audit firm to do it? I think so. Before we move on to the second organizational and structure outside the federation, and that's the systems that belong to it, we have to remove conflict of interest. Once we remove conflict of interest, it's open season. We peel back the layers one at a time. And I'm going to be brave. We're going to talk about some. We're going to talk about the relationships with Major League Soccer. We're going to talk about the very people that are in the federation right now that could be on a very serious job interview, what their role is, and what they're doing about their role. Our current CEO has a salary structure that could possibly house 3 to 4 very gifted people to do the same job, or not do the same job, or maybe we apply more jobs to the federation and get more work from the federation. But we need to peel back those layers at the federation level.
30 seconds.
In the youth level, we all have the same airspace, but we're not flying in the same pattern. DA, ODP, in-town programs, recreational leagues, inner city, elite clubs. Like I said, we fly in the same airspace, but all of them do not fly in the same pattern. We need to define that system, get them to work together so we can move U.S. amateur soccer and youth soccer forward. Everything else gets fixed.
Thank you, Paul. Next question. As president, what will be the process for you in selecting the next men's national team coach? Who do you believe should be involved in that process? First up, Eric Winaldo.
Thanks. That's a good one. Well, we operate under the assumption that our president is the sole selector of our coach, which isn't always the case. what we've gone through, and I think we should go backwards before we start talking about the future, is a process where we hired somebody from the outside. We hired Jurgen Klinsmann because he had a plan, and the plan was supposed to last 8 years. And unfortunately, what happened there is we asked him to do 3 or 4 jobs. First and foremost, the national team manager / coach needs to do one job, and his job is to select a team, to assess and select the team. That's it. It's not to be a technical director. It's not to be responsible for the development of the sport in this country. I think we did that with Jurgen simply because we had to justify his salary. Now, we got to a situation where we brought in Bruce because maybe there was a familiarity and he could fix the problem. And now we're sitting on the outside looking in. Right now really isn't, I'm not trying to skate out of the question, but right now isn't the time to discuss who the next manager is. What we need to do is to refocus on the one thing that we do know, is that we have an incredible pool right now of talented soccer players in between 17 and 23. The advice needs to be that we focus our energies on the Olympic team. That's our first opportunity to find out what we have and to put them
30
through
seconds.
A scenario where we're going to be able to test them, their character and their talents, and be able to know what we have, which unfortunately will be 4 years and a couple months from now. So talking about the coach, we have to also wait for the World Cup to be over. We'll assess some of the candidates after that. I totally skated out of that, didn't I?
Thank you,
Olympics.
Steve Gans.
Well, there'll be a committee, for sure. There'll be a committee, and that committee will involve certainly people of high technical backgrounds, likely former national team players, but also people from the entire soccer community, like the adult and youth state associations. Because what I know is this game is organic in this country, and you have perspectives that someone who is a national team player and isn't involved in youth, let's say, for example, or otherwise, everybody brings their own perspective, can bring. When I was a teenager, there was an NASL team that started to great fanfare called the Philadelphia Fury. Anybody remember that team, Philadelphia Fury? Anyone? Lynn, you must. But anyway, that was owned by rock stars Peter Frampton and Mick Jagger, and they brought in 3 of their boyhood idol players from England. And what I remembered observing that team crashed and burned very quickly, that of those 3 players, 1 really worked hard while he was here, and 2 treated their time in the NASL as if they were on holiday, and they didn't care. And what I realized at that point is anybody who comes to contribute to the game in this country needs to be vetted by specific criteria, needs to understand that we are still a growing soccer culture. I have my own theory about who would be the next national team coach and profile. There are presumptive benefits of an American-born coach, and there are presumptive negatives, and vice versa. Presumptive benefits of an international coach and presumptive negatives. But what I'd say is there'd be a committee. It wouldn't be too large, but it would be broad-based.
30 seconds.
And that committee would come up with criteria, that would come up with the schedule of interviews, criteria of questions, an ultimate vetting process, and then a recommendation, and then selection.
Thank you, Steve. Paul Lapointe.
Some of the best players in the world don't make the best coaches or the best business people. To pick the next coach of the American soccer team, it's going to take maybe taking advantage of the very systems that we have in our own system. How about a director of coaches? We have them at region, we have them at state, we even have them at club level. I don't think there is one in the Federation, a DOC. So we'll compile a DOC to start that process. The Federation president is not going to handpick this coach. And I'll say it, and I've said it before. Coaches teach the game with inside the lines, but leaders develop champions. So before we go ahead and pick a head coach, we pick a DOC that starts that process, and we find a coach that can lead our players into a game rather than just teach them the game as well. And I believe the last 2 World Cup games that you viewed, it didn't seem like we had leadership on the field, and our players even wanted to play. And there's a vast difference between coaches and leaders. Leadership taps into the mentality of a player. It gets them to want to play beyond their physical, mental, technical, and tactical abilities. But we will appoint somebody in the Federation, and it'll come through a DOC program to help the president pick the best national team coach in America or abroad. And I believe it's just like our players in this country. There's a 19-year-old in our country right now that can step on the grid and play that nobody even knows about. There's also a head coach as well. We have to roll up our sleeves and go find it.
Thank you, Paul. Paul Caligari.
In looking at that question, I was wondering if it was the national coach for futsal, or if it was for beach soccer, or it was for the men's national team. I'll believe that we need national team coaches for all three of those World Cup and Olympic events. But the focus, obviously, I'm sure, is because of the fallout recently of us not qualifying for the World Cup. And that could be super exciting, because I believe that knowledge speaks, that wisdom listens. And it's just a matter of respect and going out and listening to others' opinions. Right or wrong, you gain something from it. Certainly having the appointment and a hiring of a sporting director, technical director, the term's not necessarily important right now, would assist with that decision. But as president of the United States Soccer Federation, I would take 100% responsibility and accountability for that decision. Because it could go well, and it could go wrong, and I would not defer that to anyone else. In terms of looking at what's realistic in this time period, there's an interim period from February after the election to post-World Cup. We have the opportunity as a country to evaluate the world and to look at what coaches perform, perhaps performing in the World Cup, perhaps as they're heading into their final segments of their seasons, as well as looking at what we could evaluate here domestically as well. So I would consider an interim head coaching position for the men's national outdoor team in this period of time, and make sure that we evaluate everything and look at all our options in order to find the best national team coach we could find that will represent our values, that will represent us, our winning attitude, and bring us to success. Because I truly believe that's what players want, is to do their best, to become their best at that level. And we need a leader to do so. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Paul. Mike Winograd.
Thanks, Joe. You know, this question is critical because it goes to one of the central failings, I think, in U.S. soccer right now, and that is the decision-making process for critical decisions. It's point number one in my platform. And whether you're talking about the selection of the national team coach, which I'll talk about in a moment, or the decision to go birth year in the youth clubs, or the decision to take reffing out of the hands of administration, out of the hands of the state, these all goes to the process of the decision-making. With respect to the coach, we don't know. You know, we can talk about whether we thought decisions on Jurgen were good decisions or bad, hiring him, giving him an extension, and all the other coaching decisions. But the fact of the matter is, we don't know who made the decision. We don't know how it was made. What we need to do is make sure that that process is inclusive. People who are affected need to be a part of that process. We need advisory committees that are inclusive, merit-based, and transparent. When you're selecting the coach of the national team, you have to have a committee with former players from the national team, maybe current players from the national team, former coaches, business people. There are lots of ramifications in terms of marketing. You need to draw in the decision-making process on the vast human resources in this country. Those affected, those with the boots on the ground, have to have a say. Again, you cannot make these decisions in isolation behind a closed door with one or two of your friends from an ivory tower in Chicago. You need to put together a broad-based advisory committee to help with these decisions. One last thing that I want to mention. When you talk about a lack of transparency, I was at the Costa Rica game at Red Bull Arena. And I was very excited to go, and I took went with my family, my kids. And there are lots of merits on both sides of that, whether the U.S. national team should have been playing that game at Red Bull Arena.
30 seconds.
You could think of arguments on both sides. But what I found absolutely stunning, was to find out in the media that in a game of that importance, in that stretch, the head coach was not even consulted on the decision. That's the type of process that's been in place, and that will change immediately.
Thank you, Mike. The next series of questions came from the attendees, so from the membership. I will first tell you which person is answering so that the other four can relax for a little bit. This first question is for Steve Gans. Based on the fact we have not made the Olympics in the past 2 cycles and the World Cup, what grade would you give the Development Academy, and would you continue it?
So I can't relax? I got to go first. Okay. All right. And I'm sorry, what grade would I give it? And what else? What was the other part? What was the end?
Based on the fact we have not made the Olympics and World Cup, what grade would you give the Development Academy, and would you continue it?
So I would continue it. And again, I'm used to be on the board of a Development Academy club. But what's very important is that I'm a parent of 2 Development Academy players, one who went through the Development Academy fully, one who left the Development Academy after U14. And what I'd say about the Development Academy is there are some really good things about it. Technically, players are improving in many cases. However, I would change the Development Academy in a major, major way. And it does bespeak all this process stuff we're talking about here in this case. Because the edicts that come down from 30,000 feet from Chicago are ridiculous. There are so many utterly ridiculous edicts and strictures in the Development Academy which are inimical and counterproductive to producing good players. I've seen the joy of the sport be sucked out of kids I love, kids I've coached. I've counseled kids who actually, after going fully through the Development Academy, decided not to play college soccer, and I told them that when they got perspective and distance, they would go back and play, and in each case, that's happened. There's something good about the Development Academy, but there's something not good. What would I give it as a grade? B-. That's what I'd give it. I would not junk it.
30 seconds.
I would not junk it at all, but I would change it in a very major way. And that is the dichotomy of these kind of strictures, and you face it with the SRA thing coming up as well, where you're not involved with these decisions and they're dumped on you. It's the same thing of being in trenches of the Development Academy. I get rid of the utterly ridiculous rules. I would liberalize the high school, look at liberalizing the high school restriction, and I would do everything I can to create players who play with joy, because we don't have enough of those, especially coming out of the Development Academy. They're either robots. If they're not robots, they've lost their joy.
Thank you, Steve. Next question for Eric Winalda. What are your expectations for our men's national team and our women's national team?
Well, I think one of the things that I do not like is the fact that we've been asked to lower our expectations consistently over the course of the last decade, and having the assumption that coming in 16th in a World Cup defines success. Maybe you guys have a different definition of success. I certainly don't consider that a success. My expectations of our national team are what they've always been. And if you ask the question, have we gotten better in the last 10, 12 years? I don't think the answer is really yes. I think there's been a lot of growth. There's been a lot of misunderstood opportunity. But our teams are lacking in several places. And one of them is their ability to, their players are in their ability to express themselves. And we don't have any specialists. We don't. Robots might be a word that the academy is churning out, but that's not how this works. Everybody in this room knows what your climate is like in your own state. You know what your kids are all about, and you need to embrace that personality. That's how we become a better soccer nation. When each one of us, when we're on the field, maybe in my day it was a little different, but we represent this country in a better way. My expectations are, by the time we get to 2026, to be a serious contender. A serious contender. Not just because we're going to be hosting it. Everybody's talking about the 8-year plan. We can turn this into an 8-month plan if we start getting our culture right. And as Paul said, very astutely again, twice, that we need to understand who we are, embrace who we are, and have an identity as a soccer nation. Now, the women have handled the business, haven't they? The only thing that I'll say about the women that play for our country is that they have represented us better than anybody. And if anything changes in that regard, it's tougher to stay on top. That's the hard part for them. To be at the top and to stay there is harder than anything else. But we need to have a better relationship and a better culture with our players at the national team level. This is the hardest part for you all to hear. I played for my country over 106 times. And the entire time I hated the Federation. That's not the kind of culture we need.
Thank you, Eric. Next question for Mike Winograd. What role should U.S. soccer play in CONCACAF?
You know, U.S. soccer should play a leading role in CONCACAF. We have got resources, human resources, financial resources that most of the other parts of CONCACAF just don't have. And we should have a leading seat at that table. We need to consider the interests of everybody in that group and make sure that we're adjusting so that we take into consideration all of those interests. But we should have a leading group, a leading position. And one of the things we need to do in CONCACAF is, you know, if you look back when I grew up in the 70s and 80s to where soccer is now and compare the two, it's a different world. We've got an easier time qualifying. We had a tough go this year, but it's easier to qualify. We've gotten a lot of gains. The U.S. market is a great one that FIFA wants in the World Cup. We need to make sure that we are taking advantage of that and doing better for CONCACAF, getting the respect that we need for CONCACAF. You know, I'm sure Eric and Paul can speak to the difficulty in playing in some of those countries in CONCACAF that I don't think the rest of the world appreciates. We need to make sure that we're taking a leading role in getting the respect for CONCACAF that it deserves and getting better placement and even more opportunity to get into the World Cup. And we, again, should be taking into consideration everybody's views, working with our fellow colleagues in CONCACAF, but absolutely taking a leading role.
Thank you, Mike. For Paul Lapointe, since there is so much focus on obtaining college scholarships, how do you intend to influence the collegiate game in the alignment process?
The collegiate game is near and dear to my heart, having coached in college. And what has to be done right off the bat is the president of the federation needs to pick up the phone to the NCAA and make a call and start working on the investment of a process that supports the scholarships that you're asking about. We really don't have a relationship with NCAA. Again, they're in their own airspace, flying off in their own pattern. We need synergy with NCAA, and we need synergy with high school as well that supports NCAA and the players thereof, and the staffs and coaches thereof. But the federation needs to engage with NCAA. I don't think they have in years. There's rule differences between the game, between NCAA and FIFA rules. We need to visit so many sectors. But we need to start communicating with NCAA from a federation standpoint. I don't think it's done. It's been done yet, but it will under my watch.
You still have time, Paul, if you'd like, or is that?
I'm done.
Okay. Last question from the membership to Paul Caligieri. What skill sets do you bring that qualify you to lead a national governing body?
Well, if the question is then what qualifies me personally to be president of the United States Soccer Federation? As I opened up, it's in my DNA. I believe that along my journey in soccer, I've gone through different experiences. So when I first played soccer, I didn't dream of being a World Cup player, nor score some important goal to propel us to a World Cup. Those are things along the way that happen that you transition into. Certainly when I retired from playing professionally, I started coaching at men's and women's college soccer. It was during that period that I took an interest on the Athletes Council, and I became a United States Soccer board member that exposed me to a different side of the game. And I was so grateful and fortunate that I did experience that. But as I sat at those tables and were in meetings and felt rushed to vote at times and didn't have complete information, I started to take a deeper interest. If that is my calling to make a change and grow this game and make a difference down the road, then that's my calling. One of the things I did while I was on the board of directors, particularly on the Athletes Council, I made sure of one thing, that when we have 3 board members on athletes sitting on the board, I made sure that if it was a male being the chair, that there would be a female as the co-chair, and vice versa. So if the chairperson was a female, the co-chair would be a female. We didn't have things like that. I learned that these councils could actually operate and make rules and standards on their own. They don't need to be told by U.S. Soccer Federation of how to do things. During that period, I wanted to make sure that I got funding for us, and I was denied because I wanted to take that deeper into these communities with adult soccer and youth soccer and into the pro levels as well.
Thank you,
That's
Paul.
why I feel I'm qualified. Thank you.
Each candidate will now have 4 minutes for summarizing their answers, to go deeper into each one of their answers and to summarize their reasons for running. The order, again, on a blind draw, Steve Gans is up first.
You've been so strict, I'm not sure I can pull off 4 minutes, Joe, but I'm going to try. We're trained. I've said before, why did I run? There are 2 principles. People asked me to do it. There was a democratic principle at stake, and then also feeling that there could be someone in that position who's more accountable, who has better judgment, and better leadership skills. One of the things I just want to leave you with today is there's a recent article, and there are 7 candidates now. And so they gave a short little blurb about every candidate, and then they had a label, a one-word label for everyone. And before the article came out, the reporter called me and kind of apologized. He said, my editors did this. You're the businessman. And I cringed when I heard that because I'm a soccer guy who ultimately became a lawyer and a businessman. I'm not a lawyer who got interested in soccer. This sport's been ingrained in my soul since I'm 3, since my father dragged me to semi-pro games in the early 1970s, and then on. And I've been consistently involved in the sport. The other thing I want to say is that about this job, this is, in the immediate aftermath of the U.S. failure 4 weeks ago, I think there was some hysteria about really what this job is about. This is a very complex job. It involves someone that has a deep background in the sport and a lot of experience in soccer, but also has leadership organizational skills, deep experience there, leading organizations and companies, and someone who has deep business skills. Someone who has consensus building, conflict resolution, negotiation, and other leadership skills. And I believe I have that. I'm the one candidate here that combines that in a confluential way. In terms of platform, there's a 20-point platform I have, which you'll all be getting. But in the interest of time, I'm just going to talk about a few of the things, and particularly for this group. One of the first things I'm going to do is create a task force to end the divisiveness in youth soccer, the zero-sum divisiveness. One of your colleagues from Western New York, he drew a line for me out in Dallas, and it was a top line. And above that line was the number 4 million to represent the number of registered youth players. And underneath that, he drew 3 lines, one to USYS, one to US Club, one to AYSO, and the respective numbers of registered players. And what he said to me is, nobody at US Soccer looks under that top line. And it was a great metaphor. And that's going to change in this case. We're going to have a task force filled with state association people and others in the youth sector to fix this. I see it. I hear it. There are 2 state cups in Massachusetts. Why? Not because there are so many great players in Massachusetts that justifies that, but because there are sanctioning and registering organizations that are fighting. That doesn't help this sport at all. That confuses parents. There's an attrition rate at age 13, which is higher than in other sports. We have to stop that. We're going to address these issues. We're going to solve the infighting, and we're going to create a bit of harmony to get this league going, get this sport going forward in the youth end. FIFA. I have no ties to FIFA. I'm glad to say that. I'm going to be a true FIFA reformer. In the interest of time, I'll move on to the next point. The SRA issue that you're all facing, another example of top-down edicts. I've heard when the question was asked of U.S. Soccer, what's the problem? They said 3 of 55 state associations are bad actors.
30 seconds.
So 52 of 55 are doing it the right way. That doesn't make sense. So we're going to have a summit to fix these issues or address these issues ourselves. The women's national team playing conditions, they're going to be equaled out right away. Paul makes a great point about others on the Athletes Council, Paralympic, futsal, and beach. They as well are going to be treated with respect. And that's a common theme I hear from everyone. They don't feel like they're treated with respect. Every constituent in U.S. soccer is going to be treated with respect. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you, Steve. Mike.
Thanks again, Joe, and thanks again for everybody who's been watching and who's here live. I want to make U.S. soccer better. I said this before. We have made great strides in U.S. soccer over the last 20 years, but in a lot of areas we've lagged behind, and there is an increasing fracture within the landscape at all levels. So let me just talk briefly about some of the specifics, some of which we've covered, and I won't retread that, but some we haven't, of how we're going to do that. There are 3 key initiatives that I've been talking about from the beginning. You can see on my website. First is the decision-making process. It has to be inclusive, merit-based, and transparent. We need to bring in the vast human resources in this country. We need to bring in people who are being affected by decisions. No matter how smart one person is, he or she cannot possibly know everything that people at the state associations know, having done this for years. We need to consider all these perspectives. Number 2, something we haven't talked about, is equality in women's soccer. And let me be clear about this. First of all, I'm actually puzzled. It's stunning to me that we're still even talking about this. This is actually an issue. So let me be clear. If the men are not playing on substandard fields, the women will not be playing on substandard fields either. And I don't think either should be. If the men are traveling in first class, the women are going to travel in first class. And when it comes to pay, if both sides decide they want the same pay structure, there's going to be equality. If one side decides that they want a different pay structure because it suits them better, there will be equivalence. But one way or another, there's going to be equity. And I've only heard one argument as to why there isn't, and that's revenue. And let me just say 3 quick things about that. Number 1, it's completely irrelevant. Whether or not there's more revenue on the men's side than the women's side has nothing to do with the mission and spirit of U.S. soccer and has no bearing on the equity that needs to be in place. Number 2, it's actually probably misleading, especially in a cycle like this where the men didn't make the World Cup and the women did. Revenue on the women's side is probably going to be even greater. And number 3, when you look, last year, if you look at the financials of U.S. soccer, they spent $80 million on the national teams. To actually achieve equity here, you're talking about a single percentage, a single-digit percentage of that to fix this. It's actually stunning that we're even still talking about this. The third thing that I've talked about is my initiative is reducing the cost barriers. And again, on the playing side for the youth and the coaching side. And that gets into fixing and helping to fix player development and the state structures, which again, need to be done on a state-by-state basis. There is not going to be a one-size-fits-all solution in this country. U.S. soccer there needs to be integration. There can be competition, right? In this country, somebody can say, I think I can do a league a little better, so I'm going to try it. But there needs to be integration. We need to be rowing in the same direction. And the U.S. soccer needs to make sure that rules are implemented fairly and uniformly. And there is clarity. Whatever the structure is, there is clarity for the consumer. I think I'm uniquely situated to do this. It's going to take intelligence, fairness, and open-mindedness, and it's going to be hard. You need to be prepared, diligent, and you're going to have perseverance, quite frankly, stamina. You're going to have the ability to bring people together to sit and synthesize in real time different facts, different opinions, different perspectives, and articulate persuasively a path forward that everyone will buy into and understand it's in their best interest.
30 seconds.
I've been doing this for 17 years at the highest level. There's no magic talisman. If there were, I'd be out of a job. I brought executives into a room from the biggest companies with high-stakes bet your company cases at stake. You need the business side, and you need the soccer side. I've played, I've coached, I've managed at the youth, collegiate, and professional levels. I can bridge the soccer and business side, and I've done it at extremely high levels. And so I ask for your vote, and together we are going to make U.S. soccer better.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
Paul Caligari.
Well, I think we could all agree that there's been a lot of conflict over these years, and what's a shame is that it's been promoted in a interesting way. And when I really look at youth soccer and I look at the two big organizations, U.S. Club Soccer and USYSA, and it's not to disregard what AYSO or Say Soccer is doing, but those two programs have Olympic developmental programs. One's called ID2 and the other one's called ODP. And with that said, we could reform this developmental academy that we call United States Soccer Developmental Academy. And for me, it's simple economics. Keep those registrations in those national youth organizations rather than channeling them into U.S. Soccer Federation to help build the programs. We could assist with this transformation by simply saying we waive those fees that you're paying, $1 per kid, to help with administration costs, help with facility costs, help to build the vision that I have. Instead of promoting conflict, we instantly create unity against two organizations that are doing meaningful things, that have a tremendous amount of volunteers, that I thank all the volunteers for what you've done, rather than destroying it. Destroying this platform and narrowing the opportunities for kids. We talked about pay for play. Let's be clear. The academy has increased the pay for play for a lot of those kids. It has eliminated the opportunity for others. It has narrowed the path for youth soccer players. This plan is simple. Broaden it, utilize our resources, channel those funds right back into it. Keep your registrations, or everything is going to be ran through U.S. Soccer Federation. And I said it at the beginning. If we don't want change, if you don't want change, then I'm not the right person. I believe the path we're on is not the right path. When I look at registration, when I was on the board of directors and we were told that it's going to be 16 and 18-year-old players only, and boys, the hand went up. What about girls? Not yet. That's 10 years ago. We're now in the 11th year trying to make up. I left the board shortly thereafter. And now I see that it's boys and girls, and it's not 300 kids. You're talking thousands. And when I say 300 players, I'm talking 300 players from the state that I come out of, Southern California. There was only 300 registered players that were now extracted from Cal South and going straight into U.S. Soccer Federation. Phase 2, that number is going to jump.
30 seconds.
Close to 10,000. You times 10,000 amongst that dollar, then you could equate it to what they're reporting they have. The next phase is those academy clubs will all register directly with the U.S. Soccer Federation. So we all have a choice. The same choice I'm presenting. Either we do something about it, or we don't. I believe the path of initiating futsal at 6 to 12 years old on a grassroots program that's where our funds should go. In the meantime, utilize our resources, coaches, players, youth, adults, all aspects. Leave no stone unturned to be the best we can.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Paul, a point.
The next U.S. soccer president moving forward, in my mind, has to have integrity, transparency, honesty, business ethics. Have all 5 of those. American soccer is not broken. I said it earlier. It needs a reboot. It needs new software. Youth soccer in America and amateur soccer in America carries the sport and is the heartbeat of American soccer. And it carried the sport when there were no other options at the professional level and even at the national level years ago. We talk about change for what reason? We talk about defining systems. But you know what? From my heart, I would rather be knighted or hung on the success of a 3-year-old that puts the ball under their foot for the first time, and the parents that go along with that child and the system that they're going to belong to make sure it's proper and to make sure it's not confusing for them and to make sure that they're on the right path to support the very culture and the very things that we're talking about today. Because without that, and without that concentration from the president in his mind or her mind, then everything that we talk about will never happen. There will be no federation. There is no national team. It's all about the kids that are playing. And that's my take on the next president. And at this point, we all have ourselves to blame about why we don't qualify for a World Cup or why these systems are broken. It's because we haven't had a president to pick up the phone on a Monday morning and talk to you and say, how are you doing today? What can the Federation do to help? There's no inclusion. There will be under my watch. And I am for equal pay for women. I'm also possibly looking at the insertion of a Women's Open Cup to bring more attention to the women's game in the amateur ranks as well. I believe if you're asked to play for our national team, whether you're a man or a woman, you get paid equally as well. When it comes to the USSF, we're going to peel back the layers and remove conflict of interest. Futsal is near and dear to my heart, and I started my campaign out talking about futsal. And I think I'm the only candidate up here that has met with AMF and is connected with the futsal national team. We spent, and I'll agree with you, $80 million on the men's and women's national team in 2016. We spent $225,000 on futsal. We have a national futsal team.
30 seconds.
And we don't even sanction the sport in this country. So we don't have bragging rights in futsal. Under my watch, futsal will get the support, along with beach, deaf, Paralympic, inner city, college, high school. Everything that supports the development process to the national teams, both men and women, are all in those categories. And that's where the attention span needs to be. And it will be under my watch. Thank you very much. I hope you nominate me. Win, lose, or draw. We're on the right path. And I hope I'd be considered to be a part of the Federation, even if I didn't get elected president for the Federation.
Thank you, Paul.
So thank you all, and I'm honored and humbled to be here.
Eric Winalda.
All right, so looking at where we are now, it requires a couple of things, and we don't have, if we really think about it, a clear vision. So we all understand that we need leadership, and this needs structure, because we've been left to our own vices to a certain extent. As much as we've celebrated who we are, we can't even tell ourselves who we are right now. This country can be so great. And it's not broken. It's a very unique part of our history that we need to fix it and fix it now. What that means is taking all of the things and all the things that we've discussed about what exactly needs to be done at this juncture. And we look at it and we feel that of all the potential in the world, that the president's job is to build a culture that makes sense for all of its members, from the adults to the youth to, of course, the pro level, and to have an understanding of who are we? What are we trying to accomplish? We've always thought that this was, we've been teased, we've been told that we'll always be the sport of the future, that soccer thing. We have to believe in ourselves. We can't rely on the message as hire an outside source from Holland or Belgium to tell us how to do soccer. You know how to do soccer in this country. You do. The Federation's relationship with the existing organizations is the only thing that's broken. That's the only thing that's broken. And when we're fighting with ourselves, how in the hell are we supposed to beat the rest of the world? I played for my country. I've stated already that I didn't particularly have fond memories of our federation because they didn't know how to talk to us. They lied to us. They manipulated us. They ruled us by fear and then expected us to do great things. In any company, in any organization, the culture needs to be right. We've got that wrong. By believing in ourselves, first and foremost, and I do believe in us. I believe in the American player. I believe in the American people. And I believe in a vision that once it is well defined, it will define us. And we will have a path that will make sense. A lot of great ideas. And I want to, because I'm the last to go, I want to commend all these gentlemen on their bravery. Because that's what it is. To stand here before you and say, we want to help you help us fix this. But until we become we, we're not going to accomplish anything. Again, the president of the United States Soccer Federation has a tough job, and that's to bring all of us together. All of us. Understanding our functions. Creating structure at the professional level. Creating structure at the youth level. That everybody knows what they're supposed to be doing at all times. Right now, do you know? You don't. Don't lie to me. You don't. We are going to be great. It's going to take soccer decisions. It's going to take very intelligent people at the administrative and, of course, the financial side. But the advantage that I have is I understand this game as a football man. And my job will be to help you understand this game in the sense that when we understand what we are, we will be great. And I think we're going to get there. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Gavin, wherever he is, for putting this all together. We've enjoyed it immensely. Hope you have as well.
First of all, I'd like to thank all of you that are here, the attendees at the Winter Convention. You were engaged from the time we began. You were engaged with the questions that you were asking, and that makes it a very exciting part of this process. I'd like to also extend thanks to Gavin Owen Thomas and to everyone at GotSoccer. This is a staff of incredibly motivated folks that saw the importance of inserting this into the Winter Convention, saw the importance of giving the candidates an opportunity to express their position, and saw the importance of doing it in a very, very professional way so that it could be viewed by others around the country that are very interested in the outcome of this election. And then finally, to the candidates to my left, to Eric, to Mike, to Paul, to Steve, and to Paul. It is, Eric, I don't know if you said the word courage or not, but it is to stand up and to say, I want to try and change. I want to try and help. I want to be someone that can be a catalyst for improving where we are at this point does in fact take courage. So on behalf of everyone at GotSoccer, I would like to extend a personal thanks to the candidates and ask that you do likewise and give them a round of applause. Thank you all very much for being part of the Candidates Forum, and have a great rest of the day.